Hi guys. So today I will be talking about the speech and language processing model by Nation and Neuro. In the past, speech and language was thought to be very abstract. So ang atong SLPs back then or diagnosticians katong mo diagnose og speech and language disorders, they have always had that dilemma nga maglisod sila og organize sa information of speech and language. Because speech and language can be very overwhelming. Maragdagan kay siya connections. So this to this. So Nation and Aram thought of creating a model as a frame of reference to diagnose kung unsang area of speech or language ang breakdown. So this SLPM is a reference for making diagnosis for speech and language cases. Okay, so let's proceed to the definition. What is SLPM? So again, it's a human information processing model. It's a framework for organizing and retrieving information about normal and disordered speech and language, and as a measurement framework for establishing cause-effects relationships. A framework for organizing and retrieving information. So basically, giunsa siya pagka-organize and pag-retrieve ng information from our minds going to the output. It also talks about how the normal and disordered speech and language are different. So we will discuss about how normal language carries on, and if there are disruptions in the middle, monitor on disordered speech. Okay, so let's look at the SLPM. It's actually very simple. I mean, if you think about it, there are three general parts. So the first part is called the speech and language environment component. So this is it's actually good if I think about it. The framework is kind of old because ihang date merg 1982 pa, but in reference to modern frameworks or ways of thinking, I'm very happy nga ang SLPM na si environment component because it's very important na maka-understand ta of how the environment affects our speech and language. No? Some of scientists or I mean researchers or linguists believe na speech and language development was thought to be nature lang gid siya. Chomsky nga moingon siya nga organic ra gyud ang language nga dili siya affected by environment compared to other researchers nga niingon nga speech and language is nurtured by the environment. In that way, mo develop ang language. So this model subscribes to that, to the nurture side of language theories. Next, after the speech and language environment component, we have the speech and language processing component. This is the part of the SLPM nga i-process niyang information. So this happens inside the brain. And third is the speech and language product component. So after speech has been processed, language has been processed and speech has been programmed, mo translate to into an output, which is a speech and language product component. Okay, so let's start with the first component. The first component is the speech and language environment component. Again, mo ni siyang environment. As you can see, naisuot sa kilid, language input, pragmatic, semantic, syntactic, phonologic, voice, prosody, and phonetic structure. Okay, so what do you think is there in this component? Diba, makita ninyo, there are language and speech input. So, basically, this has two subcomponents. Ang kani siyang ato ang environment component. It is the speech and language input and the multidimensional environmental context. Let's go to the speech and language input first. Okay? This basically means that this is the complete speech and language system development exposure to all parameters and levels of speech and language. So, in the environment, diba kita as people, we have been exposed to speech and language since bata pata. So, morning in this model, ipakita siya nga this happened yun. Nga na-expose tag speech and language as we grow up or at different moments of our life bisag karon, no? So ang ipasabot niya sa input, I mean unsa nga information ning process for language input, this is pragmatic, semantic, syntactic and phonologic. So pragmatic, language use; semantic, the meaning of the words, the sentences. So ato ang pagbutang og meaning; syntactic, how the words are say tawag gani organized into to make a sentence nga masabtan by all. Phonologic, the arrangement of the different sounds to create words, to create meaning. And then for speech input levels, we have vocal tone, which is our pitch kung nasa takahay. Resonance, this is in terms of how our voice has been resonated within our resonating cavities, our oral cavity, nasal cavity, and pharyngeal cavity. Voicing, so basically the movement of our vocal folds to create a voice. Phonetic structure, and prosody. So prosody is the up and down of speech, no? Ang ato ang tone. See. Other than the speech and language input, as you can see, there's this thing called the multi-dimensional environment context. So in this way, marisig ang context wherein speech and language input happens. Okay. So ganina we were talking about the input. So kato kung unsa nga information. So ang speech and language input. This time we're talking about the context. Alright. So the speech and language input can be found in different contexts. First is the interpersonal context. Okay? So this context emphasizes na there is interaction between people, no? Or people must talk to a person in order to facilitate language learning. So kana siya, it's talking about the talking to other people, engaging in conversation. How this is an input nga musud sa imong brain, ang engaging in conversation with other people. No? So that's first, that's an interpersonal context. Next is the multisensory context. Ganina, it was talking about the context nga mag-converse ang mga people. This time, this is your sensory exploration. Okay? So it may provide perceptual or cognitive basis for language, and it is the stimulus given to you to instigate speech and language. Like let's say, one example for katong interpersonal context ganina is someone would ask you or someone would talk to you, tell you about stuff, and they would ask you, when is your birthday again? And then you respond with your birthday. So moto na din language, no? Na ay language nga makita and speech sa katong pag-respond nimo with your birthday. Diri sa multisensory context, murag yapon siya na ay stimulus to instigate speech and language, but di na siya lain nga tao. This time, it would be kato mga sensory experiences nimo. Like let's say, bisag ikaw raw sa, and then you're eating like really good food, like let's say ramen, kaon kag ramen. Ikaw raw sa, and then awal makaingon gyud ka nga, alam mi uy, this is so good. Mo na siyang context. This is the multisensory context. nga naay stimulus to instigate speech and language. There is sensory information. This sensory information is sent to the brain, form siya concept, and then mo respond ka with language. Okay? So, mo ni siya og mo siya language formation from all your sensory experiences. Okay? Third is, excuse me, the social cultural context. So it talks about the different cultural differences bitaw per language or depending on where you live. So the social cultural context is dili siya murag a one-time thing or ma-experience nimo 2 days makaingon na din ka nga naa na ka sa social cultural context. No, we know nga your thought processing or your concept of the social cultural context will be built through your everyday interaction. No? As time goes by, you begin to understand ngano ingani man siya mo respond, nganong murag kusog man kay tingog ang mga Bisaya. That's a social cultural context, di ba? Nga atong ma-understand, atong ma-learn as we go every day. Go about our lives every day. More like mag-converse tag one person, mo experience tag mga interpersonal context, multi-sensory context, and this builds our social cultural context. Next. So the speech and language input plus the environmental context helps the clinicians examine which specific environmental factors affected the child's speech and language. Okay? Like, could it be ang katong input of language nga maybe dili enough ang pagka-expose niya to different words or different objects, different uses of language? That could be one. If mayunta sa speech input, maybe wala siya na-expose to a variety of these. Like, let's say, na-expose siya to only one communicative partner. So, yung speaking style, ang kato iyang voice, prosody, phonetic structure, ihang basis kay katurag yung one person. No? So, na-limit siya ato nga factor. Or, it could be sa ato ang multi-dimensional nga environmental context nga wala siya na-expose to interpersonal context. So, wala siya na-expose to interaction, wala kay siya ma-learn from that, and so on. No? So, this framework, kato again, bisag napata sa environment component, maka-point out ta if na ay breakdown dito, no? If na ay kuwang dito, that might be the reason. And also, lastly, it helps in differential diagnosis of disordered speech and language versus typical speech and language. Alright, so we're done with the speech and language environment component. Let's go with the speech and language processing component. So, this part is kind of long. This part is divided into 3 areas. Now, we will know later. So, the main purpose of the speech and language processing component is to infer potential physical disruptions from observed speech and language behaviors, okay, and predict potential speech and language disorders from knowledge about physical disruptions. So this component is divided into 2, no, na major concepts. I know you kamutan na nakabasa na mo ani because we had an activity about this and a reading session ta. You divide niya into 2 things. We have physical processes, na ay 9 kabuok sa itong Slpm, and then we have our behavioral correlates. Atong physical processes, kay these are the physical processes that account for events that take place internally. So, mo ni silang mga processes na involved na gyud atong structures, no, inside. I know you might get confused because it's called physical processes. Unya, dili day siya directly observable. But they're naming it physical processes because na siya anatomic and physiologic relations, meaning the physical anatomy and the function of that. So that's why they're calling it physical processes. Okay? In the SLPM, you will see that these are indicated with the ones inside the box without the parentheses. So, kani sila without the parentheses. No? And then, another naman is our behavioral correlates. There are 8 in the chart. So, these are the sets of behaviors available to the clinician. Meaning, when we say available to the clinician, it's very visible. No? It's visible for everyone. It's visible to everyone, not just the clinician, but to the parents as well, or bisag kinsa ilang kastorya, no? Since physical processes are not observable, we observe the behavioral correlates as well, and then get an idea of what's going on with the physical processes. So again, as clinicians, we look at behavioral correlates, try to match them with physical processes, then diha na din ta makakuha. This is how this framework will be used. In the chart these are the ones with the parentheses. So, kana sensation, perception, comprehension, repetition, formulation, sequencing, and motor control. Okay. Excuse me. So, let's start with the first segment, the auditory reception segment. Okay, ang 3 pa niya to go through. Auditory reception segment, central language thought segment, and the speech reduction segment. Sige. So, let's go to the first one. Okay, look at these. Oh, this is the table. These can be found in the reference I gave you guys. Okay, siya. Ato lang siyang gi-organize by color, kaya para maklaro lang yun siya, no? So, first is the auditory reception segment. Alright, so this is the auditory reception segment. As you can see, no? Gi-crop na ko. It starts with auditory acceptance transduction to auditory analysis transmission, reception analysis, and then to auditory programming. So, it also has behavioral correlates, duha ka buok, with sensation and perception. So this includes the bilateral auditory modality from the outer ear to Heschel's gyrus, area 41, and is considered the primary recognition segment. Okay? So, recognition segment sa ato ang SLPM is the auditory reception segment. Okay. But do note that the Heschel's gyrus is just the primary reception area of our auditory cortex. This is where information is projected and it receives the full tonotopic map. So, ang tonotopic map, do you remember? Ang tones, katong high tone, low tone, sa basal area of the cochlea, and sa apical area. Kato siya. So, mo nga information you receive. And note that this is not yet the higher level of processing. Okay, so possible damage to the Heschel's gyrus may result in cortical deafness, the inability to hear information that has passed through the lower auditory nervous system. So, since reception area siya, if ma-damage siya, dili ka go through ang message, no? It mo transmit siya gikan sa atong ear, padung sa cochlea, padung saka, but when it reaches the Heschel's gyrus, which is the reception area, wala, di sila mandawat. Therefore, di siya ma-send to area 22 where it will be processed further. Okay. They also call the auditory reception segment as the pre-linguistic processes. So these are physical processes that take place in the segment before the spoken message is understood. So, even before the message is understood, mo ni siya. So, kato ang purely pag-receive lang yun siya sa ato ang auditory input, no? So again, emphasis nga wala pa'y higher processing. Higher processing happens at area 22. Okay. So this segment has two behavioral correlates. First is sensation and then perception. And has four physical processes: auditory acceptance transduction, analysis transmission, reception analysis, and programming. So first, let's go to sensation. This is defined as the low-level behavioral response to the presence of sound. So emphasis on response to the presence of sound. It does not occur until activation of the cortex has happened. So behavioral reaction when intensity, frequency, and durational characteristics are sent to the PAC. So padung pa siya send out dito. This is associated with selection or sorting out and registration of important components of auditory stimuli. This can be the sensation correlate is basically a yes or no registration. No? If there's a breakdown in sensation, how do we find out? So, basically, kuan naman yun ni siya, atong ma-find nga information is, yes, makadungog siya, or no, di siya makadungog. No? Kay, again, sa akong gising emphasize, wala pa'y processing mo take place diri. So, basically, I don't know if nakaagi na mo o kanang hearing na subjects, but this is detection. So, na-detect lang sa niya sound. Okay? So, ang pag naakay na hear or wala. Usually, this area is tested sa kanamang mga mga audiologists. How they test this area is basically they use pure tone or noise. No, if mukuan lang gid siya, murag detect kadungog kawa, yes or no. So mo na ang sensation. No? Very easily matest ra gid siya. Okay, so ang sensation na to kay nasa ni siya 3 ka physical processes, no? First is the auditory acceptance transduction. So this part is ang mo happen diri is from the outer ear to the hair cells in cochlea. So basically the sound is sent into your ear, transformed into the different energy, di ba? It transformed from acoustic mahimo siya mechanical to kind of hydroelectric na din siya, and then mahimo din siyang no mo ni siya up to the cochlea naman, to the hair cells in cochlea. Next is ato ang analysis transmission. So this happens from the cochlea, auditory pathways to the primary auditory cortex. So pasaka ni siya from the cochlea up to the cortex mo ni siya. So in this area there is coding and analysis of frequency, intensity, and durational characteristics. Third part is auditory reception analysis. This happens at the primary auditory cortex, and this part na sad kay naa siya association, magmatching na dayon, and further analysis. So when I say association, meron siya associating with previous information that you already know, matching with previous information that you already know, no? Na-expose na ka na before. Next is perception. So for perception, this is lahi na ni siya nga behavior correlate. The listener can recognize and sort information, compare and discriminate in relation to previous experiences, because, di ba, na-analyze na siya dito sa atong reception analysis. Therefore, at this point, iyan ang maka-compare na siya and discriminate based from past information. Also, this is the part na significance of info or receive can be derived, no? So, it's a result of processes occurring in the auditory modality. Auditory modality, when I say kay katong mga physical processes nga ni happen before. So, sa pagkatong auditory acceptance transduction, analysis transmission, perception analysis. So, ang kaning perception kay mag-base ra gyud ni siya sa katong mga processes before, no? Which happens in sensation. So, it's dependent on sequencing, grouping, and storing of auditory patterns. Okay. Perception, according to Luria 1966, is a very complex and active process. It includes the identification of individual signals or integration of like signals into cater groups. It also includes the selection of their meaning from a series of alternatives, discrimination of the component of this of the components of the signal that are essential to listener. What does this mean? It basically means nga murag you are sifting out the auditory information. When I say sifting out, I mean in terms of speech and non-speech sounds. So basically, kanang maminaw ka, mag-discriminate ka nga. Is this a speech sound? Is this a non-speech sound? Also, mura siyang mo happen nga kung naay magstorya na to in an environment nga loud kayo, how do we perceive speech? Diba? Kay we're selecting it out. This happens in perception. According to Nation and Aram, naay 5 perceptual operations that are basic to language processing and are very important. No? So, review lang sa tagamay sa perception in general, masyag na again, discrimination and slight identification. You determine from the auditory information available kung unsay important and what's not important. So again, back to the perceptual operations. First, we have auditory attention. Auditory attention is being able to select and alert to one stimulus over another, no? Attending to a specific stimuli. So, this time, naminaw ko sa aircon. This time, naminaw ko sa TV. That's auditory attention. Auditory rate is accommodating to rapid and complex temporal pattern of acoustic info or energy. Okay, so basically, mura ni siya og kanang naipacing device like a metronome unya ato ang ma-follow ang pace. That's because of our auditory rate, no? Mo na siya nga operation. Next, auditory discrimination, distinguishing speech and non-speech patterns. Again, atong i-mention ganina. Auditory memory, which is the retention of auditory information, and auditory sequencing, which is holding auditory info in order of presentation. Like, no? Ang sequence lang yun niya. Kung unsay una na dungog, so muna siya follow through. Very highly related to auditory memory. Okay. So, unsa man nga physical process ang mo happen here, no? It's the auditory programming 1. I say 1 because ako siyang gi 1, 2, 3 for some parts kay di ba na ay parts nga naa siya in between auditory reception segment and central language, no? So, ako siyang gi-divide depending on where they fall. So, for auditory programming 1, anatomy is basically in the primary auditory cortex in interaction with Wernicke's area. So, katupaning sa pag-send sa information to the Wernicke's area. Do you remember the association areas? Okay, reflect on it. Aning a slide. Try to recall kung unsa nga area ang na-stimulate. And it highly makes sense. Okay. This area is said to be involved with pre-linguistic functions. Gihapon. Sorting speech from non-speech patterns, auditory to phonetic pattern conversion, and storing phonetic features. So, Basically, if you think about the palpa, this is the auditory phonological analysis. It's that part. Okay? Alright. Sige. So, ang product gikan sa ato ang auditory reception segment is na-finish naman ta. So, ang end product niya is they have phonetic patterns and there is prepared speech data for linguistic processing. So, muna to, output na to. No? After, we go to the next segment, which is the central language thought segment. Here. Central language thought segment. There. Okay. So this part is said to be the linguistic cognitive processing system of the SLPM, no? Processes pre-linguistic information from the first segment kato atong mga nadawat nga phonetic patterns. Dili na din siya process. Is said to be ideational or symbolic in nature because of language and derivation of representational meanings. So when we say representational meanings, murag yung ang pag-represent nimo og things inside your brain. So that's you. Language gets in general. Okay, the central language thought segment takes part in the decoding and interpretation of auditory information, integration of past experiences with new information, and the creation of messages to be spoken. Or it could be said ang repetition of heard information. So it has 4 behavioral correlates. First is comprehension, followed by formulation, integration, and then repetition. And contains 3 physical processes, namely auditory programming 2, language cognitive representation, and speech programming 1. Sige, so let's go to the first behavioral correlate. It's comprehension. So in this part, the listener converts phonetic information patterns into phonologic, syntactic, and semantic representations and compare these with already stored information. So here, comprehension na ay decoding of auditory patterns into linguistic information and entails the analysis of phonologic, syntactic, and semantic components. So, comprehension in this sense is basically what comprehension is very literal. Literally defined sa ato ang SLPM. It doesn't involve the kanang higher order thinking skills. It just involves literal comprehension based on syntax, based on kana siya giunsa pagka-organize ang sentence and the meaning behind, the literal meaning behind. More na ang comprehension. Because ang other process, ang katong higher processes pa, mo happen to sila sa ato ang integration nga part na. Okay? So, unsa man nga physical processes ang involved diri sa comprehension. Okay, first we have auditory programming 2. So, this happens in the Wernicke's area in interaction with the auditory association cortex. And then, in this part, kina phonologic comprehension. So, decoding phonetic parts into phonemes and phonologic sequences. And there are some aspects of syntactic decoding. Okay. So, sa language cognitive representation, we also have, ang anatomy niya is, this happens in the angular and supramarginal gyri in interaction with auditory, visual, somesthetic association areas. Okay. Look at the anatomy. Think of the association areas atong i-discuss, look back, and try to relate. No? This is basically the semantic system if we compare it to the palpa. This is where syntactic and semantic comprehension happens. and the linguistic processing of messages. So if we go back, atong tanawon, ang comprehension. Unsa man jud under comprehension? Di ba? Under comprehension, we have two physical processes: auditory programming and language cognitive representation. In auditory programming, di ba na ay phonetic patterns, na ay patterns ang ma-record. Mauna to siya ang syntax, no? And then from the language cognitive representation, na ay meaning, na ay words, sentences. We derive the meaning. That's why, again, emphasis, this part involves phonologic comprehension, syntactic coding, and ato ang semantic part, no? Sige. So, let's go with the next behavioral correlate. It's called integration. It's the creation and planning of spoken messages, intentions, and contextual modifications to make messages appropriate to the listener's settings and time. Okay, so this is the part and emphasize ko about the difference sa language and comprehension and integration. Ang integration part is kind of higher order. It taps into your memory as well, and trying to comprehend the environment in a way that you're not just thinking about the input, the speech and language input, but you're thinking about the environment as well, no? You're trying to integrate, or you're trying to see intention, detecting intention, kana siya, the higher order skills. Inferencing, knowing if mo ba ni nga appropriate thing to say, given the time and the setting, is it appropriate to say this? This happens in the integration. Kaya di ba ang comprehension ganina was just literally comprehending words and their syntactic formation. No? Kung giunsa sila pag-form, pag-arrange ang words. Okay, the physical process involved here again is, diba, very obvious. The language cognitive representation, same area, angular and supramarginal gyri. Again, reflect on this area, association area. I'm pretty sure Dol Renisi is a Wernicke's area. So it might give you information on what happens here. So it's the higher order language cognitive interpretation of messages. So, kato na multimodality analysis. Kato akong giingon nga dili lang speech input, but as well as the environment imong gi-take in ang sensory. And this part kay na ang synthesis of past and present information. Okay, so this part, the language cognitive representation, specifically in integration, is one of the most complex message interpretations, no? Again, ako na-mention ganina, this is where you can interpret the intentions and the different contexts. Mag-integrate ka og past and present information, and going beyond the literal meanings, like sarcasm, detecting sarcasm, or detecting unsa gyud ang intention, unsa man ni siya, is she lying to me, or like basa man ako in the way she moves, mga inga nga things. These things happened rather sa ato ang integration ng part. Okay. Next behavior correlate, we have formulation. So if you think about it, integration and comprehension, they were more kind of understanding language. So if atong i-relate sa atong association areas, mura siya sensory to siyang apart. Itong comprehension and integration. Sorry. Next, for our formulation, so kanin siya more expressive na niya. So no, if you think about it, kay nag-formulate na ka. So this is the linguistic structuring of messages and the implementation of linguistic rules to structure messages. So once intent is determined from the previous process, di ba, kay when katong nag-integrate ta kay na may intent nga na form, the following are done. So na ay lexical retrieval. So, semantic in nature, mura siya nag-retrieve ka og words, right? And then you order these words. Okay, how do I arrange these words? Nakakuha na ko words, now to arrange them. That's the syntactic. And then phonological sequencing, ang kato na ding sounds, no? I-embed nila sa tong words. This involves number one, physical process sa formulation is, again, language cognitive representation, same anatomical site, linguistic information processing for semantic and syntactic formulation. Now you're trying to encode, no? Okay. Ganina manggod ang language cognitive representation, more of kuanto siya, trying to decode the message, di ba? You're trying to understand the message. This time sa atong formulation, atong language cognitive representation 3, more na siya og nag-encode. Padong na siya formulation. And then we also have our auditory programming 3, which involves the Wernicke's area interaction with the auditory association cortex. And this part is the encoding of certain syntactic units, encoding of phonologic patterns. I think it gives you an idea. This part is encoding the sounds na siya. Sounds for production. No? Meron na siyang nag-formulate. Unsa ako ang i-produce, unsa nga sounds, unsa na ako pag-arrange sa syntax, sa sounds, o sigbalik. Pero anyways, next. Speech programming 1, no? After auditory programming, mo transition siya to speech programming. So, the area is kind of, yes, the motor language area. The Broca's area is in interaction with auditory association areas and primary motor cortex. Okay. So, diri na din siya ang auditory motor transducer. Siya ang mo translate sa information gikan sa atong auditory programming, di ba kay sounds man gyapon na speech. So, sila ang mo translate, no? Gikan sa kani siya kay maram ni siya premotor, kani premotor gyapon pero padong na to motor control. Okay. So, it turns phonologic program into a motor speech program. So, kato sa selection of words na happen na before. This part, iyan na nang i-translate from kato lang, thoughts into a more visible motor speech program na yun. Na siya plan of what to do. It incorporates both phonologic and prosodic features during the transduction. Okay? So, kato, ito ang formulation nga part. It ends with making it into a speech program. Next, we have repetition. So, in repetition, it is the reproduction of language stimulus without assumptions regarding meaningfulness and purposefulness of the response. Okay, it may occur in two ways. First is meaningful repetition. Second is non-meaningful repetition. Okay, first, for meaningful repetition, these are physical processes that includes central language thought. So, naay purpose in reproducing the sound. So, instead of just going from auditory programming to speech programming, moagi siya og language cognitive representation, where he gives meaning to the repetition. No? So, in this type of repetition, muna siya, the person thinks about his repetition. So, iyatong i-process ang information. Like, let's say mo, ipa-repeat ko og the cat and the mouse. So, while thinking of nga mag-repeat ko sa the cat and the mouse, ni register sa kong utok nga okay, I was thinking of a cat that goes meow, mouse nga kanang pest nga mukhaon og mga lood, everything, right? Everything dirty, they eat everything dirty. So, kana siya. Ako na siyang gi-process. Mao na ang meaningful repetition. Another is the non-meaningful repetition. From auditory programming, it goes straight to speech programming, so it does not pass to the language cognitive representation. In this sense, no meaning has been added. So, mura siya og non-meaningful repetition. Giingnan akong something, ako nang gi-repeat. Dayon, diritso, without even thinking about it. So, nagyapoy sequence of sounds without meaning. And do you remember the connection between the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area via the arcuate fasciculus? This is that part. That's the non-meaningful repetition. Or that's the repetition part in general, sorry. Okay. Next, let's go to the last segment, the speech production segment. Okay. There. Okay. So the speech production segment involves the bilateral structures of the speech modality. So, from the primary motor cortex down to the speech mechanism na ni siya. No? Kay, we ended with formulation, if we think about it. Kay, ang repetition was just an option. Di mo ka every time nga mag-repeat no? But we ended with formulation. So, kato siya, wala pa siya na-send ang pattern. Kaya di ba, gi-prepare pa ang motor program ato nga time. This part kay going down na gid siya. This is the primary production system. Processes occurring at this area are called the post-linguistic processes. They're called post-linguistic because they happen after the language processing at the language cognitive segment. No? And mostly because it involves the motoric production of messages. So this segment has two behavioral correlates. First is sequencing, next is motor control. And four physical processes, namely speech programming, speech initiation, speech coordination and transmission, and speech actualization. For the first behavioral correlate, we have sequencing. This is literally what it means. It's the sequential ordering of speech acts. No, so it includes the flow of speech, the timing of speech, ordering of phonetic and syllabic string. Sorry. So, mura siya o katuga sequence lang yun. From the motor program, iya na may speech motor program, iya na din to silang sequence, no? So, unsay una ay pang-ingon, ang timing, ordering, so basically that. It includes speech programming too, which again, ang anatomy niya, Broca's area interaction with the primary motor cortex, to transduce the motor programs into motor commands. No? So, iyan na din gi-translate. I-translate niya from motor program, i-translate into commands. And then, it also involves speech initiation. So, ang anatomy ani is the primary motor cortex and corticobulbar pathways. It creates neuromotor impulses for both the segmental and suprasegmental features. So, di ba? Kind of sequencing yun siya in this part, no? Trying to translate the motor program into actual commands. So, you would say if na I break down in sequencing, kay dili niya ma-sequence tarong iyang words. Like, in the cases of people with verbal apraxia. Okay, so basically apraxia is a motor planning deficit. So, ang makita ni mo siya in speech kay ma-mix gyud niya, no? Like when you say, I'm supposed to say butterfly, they say flutterby or bafflerby. So, yang mabali-bali ang sounds. because these sounds happen at this part, sequencing. No? Sige, next. Next part is the motor control part. Very straightforward. It allows the precise movements of speech mechanism structures. So the processes account for initiating, transmitting, coordinating, and actualizing speech motor activity. Physical process involved kay speech initiation. It creates the neuromotor impulses for both segmental and suprasegmental features. And then for coordination and transmission, goes down pag yun. So ang anatomy niya na nasa ato ang extrapyramidal, cerebellar, reticular motor systems in interaction with the PMC and pyramidal system. So going down na gid siya, no? It mediates, transmits, coordinates, modulates, facilitates, and inhibits neural signals. So it allows for more controlled, smooth, and on-target speech. No? So na-modulate siyang tarong. Ang voice is not too loud, not too soft. Ang flow sa tong speech kay continuous siya, dili siya murag kanga-kanga. So that's the speech coordination transmission. And then for the last physical process, it's the speech actualization. So anatomy is from the speech mechanism structures down to the PNS na siya. So atong cranial nerves, no? Kay speech man siya, again, cranial nerves, they control the different articulators, no? So this is the actual movement of speech mechanism structures, including breathing gani, coordinated and controlled neuromuscular activity of the mechanism. So kani sila ang more muscular activation na ang motor control. Di ba motor control gani? So kana siya. In speech actualization kani mo ni ang mga sub-processes nga ni-involve og mga muscular activation or motor control gid siya literally. Respiration. So, sa respiration, ato ang lungs, no? Ang ato ang expiratory, inspiratory muscles used for speech. Phonation, kay ato ang vocal folds. Resonation, ato ang resonating cavities. Articulation, our jaw, our lips, our tongue, our velum. And prosodation. So, prosodation is adding in the prosody, no? Sa katong kana various pitch inflections like how I usually talk. I'm never the one that talks in monotone, so murag varied kayo. I'm very prosodated. Okay. Next. So we're done with the center nga part, the central language segment. It ended with speech actualization. Now we move on to the product component. Okay? So it becomes a basis for identification of speech and language disorders, for diagnostic referral. A diagnostician uses observations regarding a product to determine probable problems or issues in the processing and environmental components, right? So basically, because this is the speech output, this information is very observable to us clinicians. Mo na gyud ni sila ang product output. From this product, we will then derive kung asa ang breakdown. Is the breakdown from the central language thought segment or is it from the environmental segment? No? So, diri na gyud nato makita. Diri na gyud. Alright. So, basically, nagyapon siya 2 levels, as I mentioned, in the same way sa atong input. Nasa siya ni ang output niya is for language, phonologic, syntactic, semantic, pragmatic. For our speech, kay we have, again, the same things. No? Review lang and reread these pieces of information. I don't think I need to stress on this part. I think na-learn na ninyo yung basic things. Or if wala pa, you will learn them. Narapod sila sa book. Feel free to read them. Okay. Sige. So this part, I'm about to end my discussion, but I won't end without an example of a hypothetical situation that shows us the SLPM. So, kanisiya. This is the situation. Lorna enters the room with messy hair and Pedro says, "Kagwapa sa ko iyab ay..." What is it? Okay. Uy. I think it's uy. Smiles and looks at Lorna's hair. Unyan, ingon si Lorna og, "Shut up!" Unyan, gawas din siya. Okay, so mo to ang scene. Sige. Now, I want you guys to pause or whatever. Pause if kanang wapagay ninyo na gets ang SLPM. I want you to review it. Okay, para when you get to this part, you comprehend it better. No? Or for those who nakasabot and kailangan yun nila augment with examples, then this would be a very great way of understanding the SLPM. Sige. So katong when Pedro said, "Kagwapa sa kong uyab uy," ay, okay, in the perspective of Lorna, mo to siya ang speech and language input. And then it goes into the auditory acceptance transduction. So katono, acoustic waves kay mo go in. The sound waves are received from Pedro. Sound waves travel through the external acoustic meatus and ossicular chain and reaches the cochlea. Sound waves are transduced from mechanical to hydraulic to electrical. So, kato. Next, nanata sa auditory analysis transmission. So, in the cochlea, the information is coded, including information about duration and intensity. No, without processing panisiya. And then electric waves are sent to the preauditory cortex. So, since the signal is in the primary auditory cortex na, recognition is there. There is sound, no? So, yes na sound or wala? Nga na. So, phonetic information from Pedro's message is retained in a sequence. So, na-retain to ang sequence sa iyahang kagwapa sa kung uyab ay uy. Okay? And then the last step of recognition is preparing for comparison with previous experiences. So, ihan na tong githing. Ang sentence nga kagwapa sa kung uyab oy. And then there is some discrimination or recognizing that the source of the sound is Pedro. So, kato siya, appeal sa analysis is localization of the sound or discrimination nga kabaw ka nga si Pedro. No? As opposed to it being environmental sound. Next, for perception and auditory programming. So, sorting the speech from non-speech, imong sort or imong sift ang kang Pedro nga voice out of the environment. And also, you're trying to store phonetic features and conversion of auditory patterns to phonetic patterns. So, in this part, ang katong message nga kagwapa sa kong uyab ay na-convert na to siya into phonetic patterns, no? Mo siya gi-encode or gi-decode. Pwede siya encode, kind of. Okay. And then, for comprehension, kay nanay phonologic comprehension, so, iyang na-understand ang kagwapa sa kong uyab uy, ay. So, iyang na decode ang phonetic patterns into phonemic and phonologic sequences and some syntactic decoding. So, kato, yung gi-decode ang message. No? So, by this time, si Lorna kay naka-attach na siya ang phonologic meaning to the phonetic sounds. She's trying to make out the proper sequence of syllables to form words. No? In the brain pa ni siya. Trying to understand. Nag-form pa siya together. And then we go to the language cognitive representation. So, it's the linguistic processing of messages na. So, syntactic and semantic comprehension is finished because manatang auditory, which is kind of syntactic and phonologic, plus language cognitive representation, which is syntactic and semantic in nature. So, by this time, Lorna would have recognized the sounds as words. No, kaya na string na sila together. She has put together these words into phrases, and the literal meaning is attached to words. So, she's able to make out the literal meaning of the phrase. So, in this part, sa comprehension nga part, di ba when Pedro says, kagwapa sa kong uyab, oy, sa diri nga part sa comprehension, Lorna understood nga gwapa gid siya. No? Because she's trying to attach the literal meaning. Sabaw siya nga gwapa siya. Okay? And then it goes into integration, which is the multimodality analysis, no? The synthesis of past and present information. Diri niya ma-determine ang intent, ma-understand ang message, and naka-recognize siya nga Pedro was being sarcastic. And ang ihang intention na hinuon is to reply angrily. No? Kaya di ba na ay kuan man sa diri intent formation sa tong integration and formulation. So nakaget siya nga di gid siya gwapa and that kuan lang to siya. Pedro was just teasing her. In this part sad kay mo lagi yang gi-integrate ang information nga kato sa una yang gi-integrate ang information nga kalkag iyang buhok niya giingnan siya og kagwapa ay so by that nganong ingnan mo kog ingana nakaingon si Lord nga nganong ingnon ko gwapa nga kalkag akong buhok. So mo to iyang na compare dayon with past information nga this is sarcasm or just humor, no? And then intent is formed, no? Lorna begins to formulate a message to counter what Pedro said with intention in mind. Intention pa to siya. And then it goes into formulation. Danay intention, implement linguistic rules to structure message. So, linguistic processing from semantic and syntactic information. So, she decides to express annoyance. So, annoyance mo to siya ang murag thought to it. The semantic part is the annoyance using two words in the order shut up mo to ang syntactic part. Again, semantic part is the annoyance, syntactic part is the shut up. So mo na to siya gi-process na to siya, gi-form. And then for auditory programming, parts of formulation, na-encode na ang syntactic units, na-encode how to say the message, encoding of phonologic patterns. And then to speech programming, so na-convert na dayon ang gikan sa auditory program ng phonologic into motor speech programs. So the intent or thought of replying is turned into a motor program, no? After recognizing the intent, she retrieves the appropriate lexical elements and formulating a message. So she considers also her own prosody in delivering the message she is formulating. Excuse me. So kato ihang na-retrieve ang for speech programming ihang na-retrieve ang information, no? Iyang na-retrieve ang words nga shut ug up. And then also iyang gi-integrate ang iyang prosody. So, shut up. So, pinalagot dapat ang prosody. Because from the intent and semantic nga annoyance. Okay, next. Okay. In this part, the motor program transform or transduces into the motor command. Diba? Ano naman tayo sa sequencing, speech programming. The program of how the sounds are shaped and will be turned into command, ready to fire and take action. So, ato siya, gihimo na siya. And then, sa atong corticobulbar pathways, nanadayon this part of the speech initiation, sequencing gihapon, it sends impulses to the speech intended to deliver. No? So, kato ang mga features nga giad na niya. And then it gets to the motor control part. So, speech initiation, same thing yapon, intention. And then, inigabot sa speech coordination transmission, um, she mediates, transits, coordinates, modulates, facilitates, and inhibits neural signals. Katong muragi fine-tune siya. And then, this part is, din isa to ang decision on whether to say it or how to say it. And then, speech actualization, the actual moving, the actual saying of shut up as the speech and language product. Okay? See. Okay, finish. Okay, thank you guys.